Excited to catch up with Jason Horowitz as we get ready for Super Bowl 59. Jason, the voice of the Raiders, also with Big Ten Network, Westwood One. Jason, let's start with your Raiders. Big offseason news. So you've got a new coach headed to Las Vegas. Your thoughts on the move to get Pete Carroll?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because everyone pointed to Ben Johnson, who was going to be they thought would be the next head coach. And so you go from on one end of the spectrum, which is young guy, 30s, never been a head coach. Everyone wants big offensive mind. And then he goes to Chicago and they pivot to what will be the oldest head coach in the history of the NFL whenever we kick off week one or wherever we kick off week one. But I gotten to know Pete a little bit through some work I've done at SiriusXM over the years. First person I ever worked with in the NFL perspective is named Pat Kerwin from SiriusXM NFL Radio. He used to work for the Jets, and he and Pete Carroll are very good friends. And the energy you see from Pete Carroll in a press conference or on the sideline, it's all the same that you get after. He is the epitome of age is only a number. And so I think if you're looking for stability, if you're looking to bring in someone who has that credibility right away, I think Pete is a perfect hire. John Spytek, the new GM that they brought in, he got the same energy level, it seems like, that Pete Carroll does. So I think people should be excited, and I'm excited to see how it works out.
I know you're not in the Raiders facilities day in, day out every week, but how
Yeah.
much do you interact with, the players and the coaches from time to time?
Not so much in the offseason, or at least not so much at this point of the offseason. I'll have a couple of chances to catch up with some of them when we get to mini camps, and then certainly when we hit the ground running with training camp. I'll be there for a few days at the beginning, and then a few days right before the first preseason game. So I'll have a lot more time at that point. I'll probably have a couple conversations with the new GM between now and the draft just to see what they're looking for and how they're thinking about it. But believe it or not, they don't like to tell anybody, not just the outside world. They don't want to tell us what they're thinking either.
You're not trusted to not leak that information. Got to
Yeah,
keep the
yeah.
draft pick secret.
Very untrustworthy over here.
Where would you assess kind of where the Raiders are headed? Obviously, just for wins this year, but Brock Bowers had a great year. He was a big
Yeah.
highlight this season. What's kind of the next step in your eyes for Vegas?
Well, the funny part about the Brock Bowers thing is I think it's saying all that because people see the records that he set and the most catches for a rookie in the history of the NFL, a record that lasted all of 1 year. Um, I think people had forgotten that it all kind of came to fruition because Devontae Adams left. And so, like, you kind of forgot that they had their, guy, and then their guy left, and which is going to turn into a third round draft pick. So, I look, they're staples, right? The Raiders have some really good pieces. Jacoby Myers had 1,000-yard season. He's one of my favorites to talk to during the year. He is just an awesome dude, and it's so great to see his success. An undrafted free agent who had great times with the Patriots, and then now he'll go into his third year of his contract with the Raiders. And obviously Brock Bowers. There's some good parts on the offensive line. They hit some good parts with the draft last year. Jackson Powers Johnson and DJ Glaze. So I think they feel good about that. The defense has statistically this year we gave a lot of points, but most of that was because the Raiders were as bad as anybody in the league in terms of turning the football over. So the defense has a lot of things in place, and they bringing back defensive coordinator Patrick Graham again, which is a good idea because he's done a great job. They just announced that this week too. So I think there's a lot of things in place, but as anyone will tell you, if you don't have the quarterback to keep it moving in the right direction, you're not going to win. And the Raiders are in a division with Patrick Mahomes, and they are in a division with Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh, and Bo Nix seems like he's about to take off. And so they're going to have to figure out who that guy is. Now, it doesn't have to be Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. If they can't get up there, if they don't think that those guys are the guys for the future, it doesn't have to be one of those two. It may be a couple of years of a bridge quarterback that Pete Carroll really likes and can give them serviceable play for a couple of years until they find their guy of the future. But it's got to be a lot better than it was this year.
Are you giving them the Syracuse buzz, telling them to take Kyle McCord?
Is he the Syracuse buzz or is he the Ohio State buzz? Which buzz is it?
I think
I
he'll
like Kyle McCord.
I think he'll tell you he'll claim Syracuse.
He should. He wasn't kicked out. He wasn't asked to leave Syracuse. He would have been welcomed back with open arms. what a year he had. If you take out the Pittsburgh game too, I mean, obviously that was as bad as it gets. But like, what a year he had, and I know the record that he set most the yards in ACC history, but even before, it just the success he had, the success his offense had was pretty awesome.
Yeah. As a
And
Syracuse,
honestly, I bet if you would have asked an Ohio State fan before the run to the national championship, like when the Michigan game ended, like, man, I wish we still had Kyle McCord.
yeah, until the playoffs, I think Kyle McCord was on the right side of that one until
Yes.
Ohio State went and won it all. As a
Yeah.
Syracuse alum, are you still pretty connected and watching a lot of the games?
No, not really. Not really. It's changed a little bit in that I'm not calling as much college football. So I'm not quite in tune to as many games as I was. And then the travel to NFL places on Saturday kind of so I catch some when I can. But no. And the funny is now I feel like I want to be connected. But there's so much going on that I feel like when games aren't good games, I don't tend to tune in.
Well, the good news is they keep moving more and more games away from Saturday. So maybe you get a
That's a
couple
great
more
idea.
Thursday and Friday games that you can check out.
Yeah, well, we're in the midst of basketball season, right? And think about the fact that Big Ten has games on regular Fox, not FS1, and that's basketball, not football. So I'm going to assume we're going to head in that direction even more so for a lot of different sports. And now ESPN picked up the ACC for, they extended that contract. So I'm going to guess Syracuse will have some spots along the way.
Yeah. Let's get your thoughts on a couple of college basketball things. Obviously, you're working plenty with Big Ten Network, Westwood One down the stretch here as we get toward the tournament. Have you ever seen a conference put on a performance like the SEC has this season?
No, it's pretty remarkable. And the Big East, I believe, has the record for most teams in the tournament. That will probably get shattered this year. I think it's fair to safely say that the SEC will get 11 teams in the tournament and maybe even as many as 13. Which, if you think about just a percentage perspective, 13 out of 16 is what, 81, 82%, whatever that number. I mean, that is insane. But it's not just because the conference is boosting everything from what they're doing in the conference. It's because of how good they were in the first 2 months out of the conference. And it's not just Auburn or Tennessee or Kentucky or what those guys did in non-conference. It's all the way down. I mean, heck, Oklahoma was undefeated going into SEC play, and they had 3 or 4 really good, strong quad one, quad two wins, and then I think they started 1-4. So I think it speaks volumes to the level of the change in that league. NIL certainly plays a role. Heck, Alabama went to the Final Four last year, and yes, they brought back Mark Sears, but they went to the portal to bring in everybody else. And Auburn, same thing. And there's Florida brought in a whole new roster, and Mark Pope, John Calipari leaves, Mark Pope comes in, and he brings in, what is it, 9 new guys, 10 new guys from the portal, and to go along with but the fact that those guys are gelling or right from the get-go speaks volumes to him. And I got a chance to get to know him a little bit with BYU. We did some of their games when I was with CBS Sports Network, and he's just awesome. So it's good to see him have that success in Kentucky too, even if you don't like Kentucky. So there's just it's something that's never been seen. But as well as anybody else does, if they get all those teams in and only one makes it to the Final Four or none makes it to the Final Four, then what was it all for?
Yep. Well, the ACC recently has been doing the most with the
The least.
least in terms
Yep.
of getting 4 or 5 teams in and getting 1 or 2 to the
Well,
Final Four.
well, and think about this too. I was having a conversation last week with Matt McCall on our Sirius XM show. He coached at UMass and he coached at Chattanooga, and he was on Billy Donovan's staff at Florida, won national championship. He was there for a long time. But the reality is that nobody's had more turnover than the ACC. And you think, Tony Bennett resigns right before the season. He all those guys that transferred in, hey, we're going to play for, and that obviously hasn't worked out. And Jim Larinaga up and leaves in the middle of the season. And of course, Jim Boeheim and Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams. And you go on and on down the list. And the ACC has just had turnover. Leonard Hamilton's probably not for that much longer at Florida State. And And so it's just on and on down the line. But you get back to the tournament success aspect to it, and you wonder, and this goes to the reality of college basketball, is that the 32 games from November, call it 4th, through March, call it 10th, the only thing people remember is what happens March 15th through April 4th. And that's always been true, or at least more so in the last 20 years. But whether that's the right way to go about it's a different story.
Yeah.
Kevin Keats, NC State, for his tenure, has not been good. But his contract kicked in last year with the Final Four run because that was super special. And the ACC tournament run and the Final Four run, like, you can't deny how amazing that is. And people will remember that forever. And no one will remember for 9 years that they've been hovering around 8th to 10th place in the ACC at
Yep.
best. and so I think, the ACC's kind of got that problem. But at the moment, the ACC also has Duke. So there's always that.
It is interesting. There's a number of mid-major coaches that are just average, and then they have 1 year and they go on a big run and they get hired to some big Power
Yeah.
Five school. It's also in the ACC, in my opinion, you've had so many legendary coaches that have retired, and almost all of those programs have hired within, and outside of Duke, not many of those hires have worked that
Yeah.
well so far.
Yeah, I mean, Syracuse certainly fits in that mold as well. And the question is, and I think this is the bigger question for Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, and then all the coaches and athletic directors within the league, is how do you fix that? Because within football and Florida State and Clemson suing the league and the dollars that they say they can't compete, you wonder if that holds true for basketball in a league that traditionally was all about basketball. And the Big East had that issue. Then the Big East reformed, and the Big East has been strong, really strong. And the ACC is going to have to figure out how to do that as well, and whether that's with a push for NIL or a push on how to kind of invest within the basketball program. The league as a whole is going to have to figure it out, because there is too many schools with strong tradition. I mean, heck, even North Carolina. North Carolina had the run to the championship game, but I think people forget that Hubert Davis' squad was an 8 seed. They weren't good. Last year they were good, and they came up just short. And so, but they were not good when they made it to the championship game. But they just had a great run with a lot of experienced guys. And so, they have to figure it out. And people at Carolina have said that the NIL package has to change. And I think some of this will all change with revenue sharing once that gets figured out. Schools are trying to, I guess, get a handle on what is an ever-changing landscape within a political world as well as a collegiate world. And so I don't think they actually know exactly how that's going to go, but it's going to change again, and then they'll have to figure it out again.
As you get ready down the stretch here of conference play, I know you've covered several teams already this season. Are there a couple teams that you have your eye on that you think might be sleepers to make big runs in March?
Well, I mean, a team that hasn't been ranked all year that I've seen recently, I really like Maryland. And one of the reasons I like Maryland is, defense travels. And Kevin Willard's squad has been criticized heavily in his 3 years, until last week, that they can't win on the road. And then you go to Illinois and you win, and then you go to Indiana the very next game and win. And now all of a sudden that narrative seems to have changed. They have 2 really good bigs. Julian Reese in his final year has really improved. And then what was their biggest weakness last year, because they were as bad as anybody, is now a massive strength. They have 3 really good shooters around those guys, plus the defense. So I like Maryland. I think they could be in that realm. A couple weeks ago, people thought maybe a bubble team. They're certainly not that. Can they get higher than a 5, 6, 7 seed? I don't know. So they'd probably be in that category. You mentioned the SEC earlier. I mean, it's hard to be a sleeper when a team has 10 teams ranked, and they're going to be seated, most of them in the top half of the bracket. But, you go back to the way that some of those teams are playing, and you go back and you look at how Vanderbilt is playing with a coach at James Madison last year who was so good, and they are going to knock off some teams. Now, by the time we get to March, after they win all these games until then, I don't know if they'll still be a sleeper anymore. But they're really good, and he's got them playing with a style that's really fun to watch. And so that's a team to like. One team this year that's been quiet, and I wonder how it will play out because they're never quiet going into the tournament, is Gonzaga, because they're not as good.
Nope.
but they have guys who have played in the tournament, and obviously the coach has been in the tournament. So like you wonder if they get to a spot where they have a run because no one's going to pick them, and this is the year they make a deep run, another deep run, I should say. So I don't know. That's another one to look at, but the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 combined are probably going to have 12 plus 9, 29 of the 68 teams in the field just from those three leagues
Yeah.
alone. So, which,
Well,
what also means, Andrew, is that when they go to bracket, some of the principles that they have to live by may have to get thrown out the window because teams are going to be too close together.
yeah. Bunch of SEC teams in that top half. It'll be tough to keep
Yeah.
them apart.
Yeah.
If you have 13 teams, you have to have at least 4 SEC teams in every quadrant, which will be
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, what's going to be really hard is, and this will sort of sort itself out over the next 5 weeks. But what's really hard is you're not supposed to play someone from your conference in the first round. Not supposed. That's part of the rules. And then the only way you can play someone in the second round is if you only play them once, for within your conference. But depending on how the SEC tournament plays out, and depending on how they have to move teams up and down the seed line because of that, it'll be really interesting how that
Yeah.
plays out when you get the bracket.
Want to get your thoughts on Super Bowl 59 coming up. Eagles Chiefs rematch of 2 years ago, the first year you were with the Raiders.
Yeah.
After year 3, you got the Chiefs twice this year. Raiders gave them a good run both times that they played them this year. You didn't see the Eagles. What are your thoughts on the game?
Well, in my 6 times that the Raiders have played the Chiefs, all but one, they've almost beaten them in all 5 and have beaten them once. My first game at Arrowhead, we were up 17-0 and lost by a point because Josh McDaniels decided to go for 2 with 4 minutes. Probably would have lost anyway, but they didn't get it and they lose by a point. Last year, Aiden O'Connell, they won, and the game they lost, they were up 14-0. And then this year, the Black Friday game, he had a field goal to win it, and they just never got to that point because the snap to Aiden O'Connell and a fumble and all the other things. So, division game, they played them hard the whole time. Kansas City's not great, but it's really weird to say that about a team that in games that they played their real players, they went 15-1, and then the playoff games, especially against Buffalo, they've done what they did. And the interesting part is their biggest concern has been all year long their offensive line. I think that will be another problem against Philadelphia with their young pass rushers on the outside, the way that they have their young shutdown corners. They're so good defensively. But it is Patrick Mahomes. And it's until someone presently is able in a big game to stop him, you're not actually going to believe that someone can stop him. And so that's really hard to look at because they win an NFL record, 17 straight one possession games. So the Eagles won't feel comfortable unless they're up by 10 to 14 points with 3 minutes to go. And even at that, they're probably not going to feel comfortable. And to do that, it'll be really interesting to see Saquon Barkley in a big spot in a game he deserves to be in. This offensive line, they have big dudes like Philip, like Lane Johnson's their second smallest guy, and he's like 335. So that's kind of, it'll be interesting to see if they can wear down Kansas City's defense. Saquon has a couple of massive runs like he has all year long, get up to 140, 150, 160. And if he can do that, I think you feel good about the Eagles, who are the underdog in this game. But, they put up 35 against Kansas City 2 years and lost. So do you really have to get to 40? Maybe.
Well, we'll find out. Chiefs are tough to beat no matter what, it seems like.
Yeah.
Even if they play all these close games. You get to cover Patrick Mahomes twice a year now. You get to see him in person. Is there something that you've noticed maybe watching him in real time in the stadium that people might not realize about how special he is on TV?
You see it on TV, so this is not what you don't see on TV, but his ability to make something happen every time it looks like he's about to have a negative play is remarkable. And I think one of the things that people credited Tom Brady with is how special he made receivers who were unheralded guys and how that happened all the time. Now he had Gronk for a while, and obviously we all Aaron Hernandez, and kind of we know what that was all about. But that is something that he was able to do. That it was um, all about him making guys into stars. And I think with Patrick Mahomes, the Tyreek Hill thing was played a big role early, obviously with Travis Kelce, but Tyreek Hill's been gone for a couple of years, and they didn't have stars last year, and they won a Super Bowl. And Travis Kelce last year was not Travis Kelce of old, at least until late, and they won a Super Bowl. And they went back to Travis Kelce this year. He did make the Pro Bowl from the AFC, and he had a good year, not historically good, but a good year. And they brought in DeAndre Hopkins, but he's not the same DeAndre Hopkins. And they didn't have Hollywood Brown until the end. And yet they were making it work enough. And with a patchwork left side of the offensive line. And I think it's just his control and ability to know situations. And, it's funny because the narrative is that he gets all the calls, and the narrative is that they cheat. And the memes are that he is in the ref huddle with Andy Reid before the game starts, and they patting him on the butt. And like, there's no question that he gets a lot of calls. But you also have to be in those positions to get those calls. And that also speaks volumes to why they are as good as they are, is that they are never in a spot where they're not in a football game. And I think that's pretty remarkable too.
You mentioned Tom Brady, obviously a minority owner of your Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah.
Have you seen him in Vegas yet?
No, not yet. I saw him. So I met Tom Brady way before that I ever started working with the Raiders. And then got the chance to see him last year when it first started that he was talking about becoming a minority owner, but just very brief. So I haven't really had real conversations or more than just a hi and all of that stuff. But look, the greatest of all time in basketball was a terrible owner, right? Michael Jordan was not a good NBA owner from a perspective of having a successful team. And I think we will see whether or not Tom Brady's influence on the Raiders, because there's no question that he has some, and rightfully so, turns into a successful run as an owner of a team. Because just because you are a great player doesn't mean that turns into a great person in charge. But he's certainly earned the right to give it a go. And I think it's really smart of Mark Davis, the owner of the Raiders, to hand a lot of those football decisions, or at least his input, over to people who have done this at such a high level and are so connected to what it does take to win over a long period of time. And I think you've got that in the organization right now, obviously with Tom Brady and Richard Seymour as minority owners, but then Pete Carroll is the head coach. So you've got those things together, and we'll see if they mesh and how quickly they mesh, and then we'll judge it 10 years from now.
11th Super Bowl in New Orleans this year. You
Yeah.
were in New Orleans second to last game of the year. What are your thoughts on it, on the big game headed back to New Orleans?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, we didn't get into New Orleans till very late because of the tornadoes and some other things, and then the tragedy that happened New Year's Eve into New Year's Day was one day later. So my recent memory of New Orleans is of that, and obviously there's heightened security and all those other things because of it. New Orleans is a wonderful place to hold a big event. I have not been to a Super Bowl in New Orleans, but I have been to many Final Fours in New Orleans, and it is a wonderful place, and much more so than the Bourbon Street and the aspect of the party scene that everybody talks about, and understandably so. But the culture, the history, some of the museums that are down there, obviously the just you put into perspective the amount of what for Syracuse anyway, like the Carmelo, Jerry McNamara, Hakeem Warwick block that happened down there. So it really is a special place in a big event history in this country. And so you put all of that together for what could be history this week. And it's probably it's just luck of the draw, I guess, but it's probably the right place to hold it because no team has ever won 3 in a row, and no place hosts an event like New Orleans. So it'll be interesting to see how those two things mesh.
Well, this has been great, Jason. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate the time as always. Best of luck with rest of college basketball season, and we're looking forward to your year 4 with the Raiders next year.
Year 4. Yeah, thank you very much, man. Enjoy your time.